All right, let's open the case file on this one. And I want you to forget everything you think you know about Roswell. Seriously, we're not talking about little green men or your standard flying saucer story. No, tonight, we're pulling a totally different thread. We're going to look at the 1947 incident through a much darker lens, as a Gothic noir case study. A moment where human ambition collided with something far older and way, way more chaotic. Okay, let's dive in.
So right off the bat, this case file frames Roswell not as some kind of extraterrestrial meet and greet, but as a full-on confrontation. Think about it. It was this point of friction where our endless drive to conquer and understand just slammed headfirst into a force that, well, it simply wanted to provoke, to agitate, to be that cosmic grit in the gears of a machine that was, let's be honest, already fundamentally broken.
So let's start our investigation. Act 1, a jagged pill of history. I love that phrasing. Because the incident itself wasn't some clean, easily digestible event. It was messy. It was a splintered moment in time that didn't just introduce something new, it literally tore a hole in the very fabric of what we all thought was possible.
And you know, it's through that hole that we get what this case file calls the Roswell Breach. And this is the pivotal event. Not the crash itself, but what the crash allowed to happen. It was a moment where the veil between worlds got incredibly thin, letting these chaotic entities from, the uncanny realm just slip right through the cracks and into our world.
The year itself, 1947, becomes the absolute focal point. This is the moment a high-stakes military recovery, something that should have been totally clinical and efficient, just transforms into this mechanical and psychological nightmare that rational science just, it refused to even categorize it.
And that brings us to Act 2. Architects versus chaos agents. Because at the heart of this breach, we find two completely distinct, opposing forces. You see, this wasn't one single alien presence. It was a conflict between these calculated architects and agents of pure, unalterated chaos. And that becomes the central tension of this whole case.
On one side, you've got the Greys, right? The image most of us are familiar with. But on the other side, there was something so much more mischievous and, frankly, malicious, the Gremlins. This case file makes a really sharp distinction between the two. And understanding that difference, that's the key to cracking this whole thing wide open. So the Greys, according to this whole analysis, were the cold, clinical architects behind the event. They represent this kind of sterile logic. They're even seen as a double of us, or maybe a potential vision of our own biological future, detached, efficient, and just unnervingly silent. But then you have the Gremlins. And they are a stark contrast to the Greys. I mean, they weren't architects, they were saboteurs. The file describes them as leathery, mischievous agents of chaos. They are the darker shadow of our own technological pride, the kind of being that prefers a wrench to a strategic plan, if you know what I mean.
And this is where things just go completely off the rails. Act 3. The crash site escalates into a full-blown nightmare of sabotage. This is where those chaos agents truly take center stage, infesting the wreckage like some kind of virulent strain and launching an all-out campaign of psychological warfare.
So you have to ask yourself, what was the crucial question facing the investigators on the ground? Lost in that noir fog of the New Mexico desert, were they dealing with a genuine interstellar threat? Or were they just experiencing mass hallucinations engineered by a force whose only goal was to sabotage their sanity and the entire operation?
And the psychological warfare was, it was a masterclass. The source describes lights flickering in patterns specifically designed to drive people to madness. The very air, it says, tasted of malice and copper. This wasn't just physical interference. This was a direct assault on the senses and the psyche of every single person there.
And the dynamic between the two groups was just fascinating. The Greys, the so-called architects, they reportedly just stood by and watched, a stoic, silent presence. And meanwhile, their Gremlin cousins were the ones actively sowing all the chaos, literally dancing in the peripheral vision of the soldiers and scientists who were desperately trying to maintain some semblance of order.
But here's the thing. This chaos was strategic. This slapstick horror of government agents chasing shadows and dealing with totally inexplicable malfunctions, it all served a very specific purpose. It created a smokescreen of absurdity so thick that the real truth of what happened was buried deep beneath the layer of madness and, cackling imps.
Okay, so let's move into Act 4, because we need to get to the philosophical core of this entire incident. We're going to shift here from what happened physically to the why. And the source material introduces this concept that is absolutely central to the Gremlins' mission, the spirit of no.
So what is the spirit of no? Well, it's described as an ancient hostility, the whisper of what the source calls Grom. Think of it like a kind of primal rage, channeled through failing machinery. It's a force of pure negation. Its goal was never to win a physical battle, but to shift the whole conflict inward, forcing the human ego to stare directly into its own limitations and its own inevitable failures.
And believe it or not, this is not a new idea. The source traces its lineage all the way back to ancient 11th century forges, saying it evolved from just a raw act of provocation into this permanent Gothic condition of the soul. At Roswell, the glitch in the system was revealed to be an ancient wight, just repackaged for a mechanical, godless world.
And this was the dynamic at play at Roswell. The Gremian Council, acting as a kind of cold, cosmic superego, met every single human attempt at progress, every ambitious yes, with the definitive and chilling no. It was this constant check on human pride, making sure the masters remained, as the file says, Gremian, haunted by their own ambitions.
So what was the end result of all this? Well, Act 5 explores the aftermath, and the history of Roswell became this tangled tapestry, woven not from clear facts, but from threads of contradiction, obfuscation, and this overwhelming entropic negation.
I mean, the contrast is just stark. On one side, you have the official story. It's mundane. A weather balloon. Simple, clean, rational. But on the other, you have the uncanny reality that was experienced by the people on site, a visceral encounter with malevolent chaos, psychological torment, and a fundamental breakdown of reality itself.
And the strangeness didn't just pack up and leave when the cleanup crews did. Oh no. The uncanny took up permanent residence inside the evidence itself. Every recovered fragment was reportedly tainted with this profound sense of wrongness that defied any kind of scientific measurement or lab report.
Ultimately, Roswell was the moment of this unholy alliance. The cold, logical intent of the Grey's technology and the wild, chaotic impulse of the Gremlin spirit, they met in the desert. And that handshake, well, that solidified the Gremlin as we know it today. It became a linguistic phantom, a specter in the cockpit that just thrives on the agitation of its host. And all of that brings us to our final act, the haunting of the machine. This is the lasting legacy of the Gremlin Breach, an echo that, believe me, reverberates through our modern, technology-driven lives.
It really makes you reconsider the technical jargon we use all the time, right? Things like instrument drift, a glitch, an engine stutter. According to this case file, those are just modern spells. They're new words we invented to mask a much older reality, the ancient inherent hostility of inanimate objects, agitated by this Gremlin spirit.
So in the end, Roswell leaves us with this profound question about the very nature of our existence. It suggests that maybe the universe is a kind of laboratory, and the constant friction we experience with our own tools, with our own technology, maybe it's all a test of our will, our patience, our pride.
Or maybe it's something else entirely. Is it a grand test of our spirit, or is the friction of the universe, the glitch in the system, the ghost in the cockpit, just one very cruel and elaborate prank being played on us by our own shadows? That's the haunting question this Roswell case file leaves wide open.